It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this second session of the series, Cutting Edge Charcha. And I'm going to introduce the speaker, Anjan Borwankar, very quickly, and then hand over the floor to him. Mahindra University has started a speaker series called Cutting Edge Charcha, where we try and bring you leading speakers from different fields who are talking about cutting edge topics in management. Charcha is a Hindi word. It means discussion. So cutting edge charcha simply means discussion on cutting edge topics. Coming to this session, it's about blockchain technology, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Anjan Borwankar. I was trying to recollect when we had last met, and I think we met exactly 18 years ago in Barcelona. He had just completed his MBA from ESA Business School, and I had just joined the faculty of ESA Business School. So Anjan was fortunate that he escaped my teaching. But I think Anjan's co-founder at Navozyme was not so lucky, because his co-founder did his MBA from the China Europe International Business School, Jitesh Jaipuriar, who's also a sailor, and I did teach him. But Anjan and I actually worked on a very interesting research project. This was in the context of his very first entrepreneurial venture. He set up a company that's today called Emerging World. And in those days, it was called Adopt a Business. And I won't go into the detail, but the interesting aspect of Emerging World is that it allows corporations to embark on leadership development journeys through partnerships with NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So you have large corporations partnering with NGOs, such as, for example, the Arvind Eye Care System in India or the LV Prasad Eye Institute in India. And on the one hand, they share their knowledge and their capabilities with the NGO. And in return, what happens is that there is a significant amount of leadership development taking place. So Anjan and I wrote an article based on our research titled "The Potential for Management Development in NGO Private Sector Partnerships." And since then, we've met a few times. We've met in Shanghai, and I think we've met in Barcelona, and in India, in Hyderabad. And as the introduction tells you, he is a serial entrepreneur. After Emerging World, he set up a chain of restaurants, Indian restaurants in Spain, and I believe they now have 4 restaurants. He then became the CEO for Asia for a European executive search firm called Catenon. And he was based in Pune at that time. He spent a few years in Pune building up the business. And now I think it's one of the biggest regional businesses for Catenon. And he has also been based in Singapore, working with companies that specialize in corporate venture. But with this venture that he's launched, Navozyme, a couple of years back, he'll go into the detail by himself. He has gone back to his roots as a sailor. I think in the introduction we mentioned that he has a bachelor's degree in the nautical sciences. And he spent several years of his initial working career in the merchant navy, working for large organizations such as Maersk and Neptune Orient Lines and so on. And in this venture, his specialization is the application of blockchain technology to facilitate a number of processes that shipping companies have to go through. So without further ado, let me welcome Anjan to the session, and let me welcome all the participants to this session. And we all look forward to a very informative and engaging session this evening. Thank you. Anjan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rama. You've made me a bit nostalgic by recounting all these years of acquaintance and friendship that we've had. And it also kind of reveals a little bit my age. Yes, which I was not conscious of, but yeah, time has passed since we, first met, and a lot of things have happened. So thanks for that very generous introduction, and also for inviting me to Mahindra University, to your business school. And it's a pleasure to be in front of everyone, students and your colleagues alike. Also, I understand there are friends who are here in Barcelona as well connected for this session. So thank you, everyone. Now, the topic today is about blockchain and what every manager should know about blockchain. That's what I've been given. So my assumption in this session will be that everyone is a beginner to the space. Okay, so I will bear with me for those who are experts, that I will go through some very basic concepts perhaps for some of you, but I think which are key to the understanding of what we are going to talk about. And I'm going to try and make it very practical, because as a manager, what we are really interested in is not so much how the technology works, the ins and outs of that, but really how do we apply it for our benefits, right? So I think that's going to be the key part here, that what can you do about this knowledge, hopefully that you will be exposed to. And as a manager, what should you be aware of when you're thinking about blockchain? So with that, in terms of the format, Rama, that we've agreed, and feel free if you want to change that, but I'll be speaking for, I guess, about half an hour or so. And the rest of the time is really for a discussion, question and answer, any comments that anyone has, which I would greatly welcome. So as Rama has already mentioned, my first background starts with the sea. I was a navigator of ships, and now I've kind of come full circle through this venture, which was started about 4 years ago. So let me share my screen with all of you, and I'll go through what every manager should know about blockchain. So give me a moment to share my screen, full screen. Okay, so you should be seeing my full screen now.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so let's begin. So the first thing is I'm glad to have been given this opportunity, because one of my primary interests now has been, over the last few years, to raise awareness about what exactly is this word blockchain, right? And here you're seeing photos of Navozyme and me participating and being invited to several different forums. So we even have been now running, as part of the Singapore Management University, a course, an executive education course called Blockchain for Maritime Decision Makers. Few years back, we were invited at the IMO, the International Maritime Organization's headquarters in London. And here you see the Navozyme team, including my co-founder, Captain Jitesh Jaipuriar, who Rama has already mentioned, has been a student of Rama at SEEPS. So this has been a prestigious moment for us, because we were invited at this United Nations organization to basically give a 2-day workshop to all the maritime business leaders across the globe about what is this technology all about, and various aspects of that. So over time, we've kind of become experts. I don't like that word very much, because it's continuous learning all the time. And especially with a technology like blockchain, things are evolving as we talk. So if there are questions that I can't answer, I'll just say I can't answer, but I'll try and get you the answer from some of my other mentors that I have. Okay, so I've segmented this talk in basically two simple parts. First one is, what exactly is blockchain? And with that, we'll see some of the other aspects there. And the second part here is really when do you consider, or how do you decide to use blockchain? Okay, so that will be also very interesting, I think, for the aspiring managers in the room. Okay, so let's begin. I'm getting a lot of people coming in, which is okay.
So maybe I'll mute my.
Yeah, that's fine. That's better now for me. Thank you. I'm assuming you can still hear me, so I'll continue. So part one here is what is blockchain? And really the corollaries of this question are what is it not? And then what exactly makes it powerful? Why should we be interested in blockchain in the first place? So allow me to begin, and I'll start with a one slide of history, but I think it's an important detail that sometimes we may forget. So the genesis or the beginning of blockchain actually starts with this newspaper article from the Times of London. And you can see that the headline says the Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. So the date is probably very small for all of you to see, but we are talking of the 3rd of January 2009. And then let me show you something else. The first block of Bitcoin, and we'll explain what is Bitcoin, what is a block very shortly, but what you're seeing in front of you on the right side is really the code that is called the Genesis block or the first block of Bitcoin. And here there's a timestamp, again, maybe a little small for you to see, but it basically mentions the 3rd of January 2009. And there's also a reference actually inside this code to this newspaper article. So the point I'm making is that these two pieces of information are not coincidental. They're actually by design. So let's ponder for a second. What's happening here in the newspaper? That those of you who remember these times, these were times which were, the financial crisis was out there, and the governments were basically bailing out banks. And there was a lot of frustration in society as to why public money was used to save certain actors. Now, we won't go into the ethics of that question because that's not the purpose of this talk, but I do want to highlight that Bitcoin just didn't appear as a new technology instantly. It was being planned. And the basic motivation here was the motivation to create Bitcoin was basically a trust deficit. So here we are talking of trust. And whenever you think of blockchain technology, you must instantly make a correlation with trust. Okay, and this is a deep one here because trust is intangible. Trust is something that is needed in every transaction that we do. So what makes this technology interesting is that we are able to capture trust. We are able to digitize trust for the first time in human history. So we'll see how this evolves in some time, but I just want you to understand that the genesis of Bitcoin or blockchain, the two are interchangeable at this moment in 2009, because there was nothing else besides Bitcoin. But the idea here was basically to get rid of central actors. So money could be exchanged from one point to the other without the need of a centralized actor or an intermediary. So let's see what exactly blockchain is. We still haven't really talked about that. So in simple terms, in my own words, first thing to remember is that blockchain is a piece of software, but it's not any software. It's a software with special features, which allows us to distribute data in a trusted manner. Now, these two words, distribute and trust, are loaded. So we will unpack them throughout the course of this presentation. So let's put a formula here. Trust or digital trust is a combination of distributed networks, immutability, and transparency. So we'll see what these three words are. I'm sure you've heard of them in the context of blockchain many times, but let's really unpack them properly here. And these are also the attributes which give blockchain its superpowers. So let's see how that actually happens. So here what you're seeing is this traditional massive book, right, which is the ledger that we see here. And it's a record of transactions that have happened. So if somebody has to trust if the transaction has happened or not, you go and refer to this big book in the center. But now imagine if magically you could have copies of this book in different places, okay? And this is exactly what the blockchain is doing. It is distributing this information across various points. And let's look at that. So this is the first part. We'll unpack the word distributed a little bit better. So to understand distributed networks and why they are important, let's look at three classical diagrams. The first one is the centralized systems on the left. So here, if you choose this red point and you make it disappear, basically you'll have a problem with all the surrounding points around it, right? I think this is very easy to see. This is central command and control. You catch the commander and the entire army falls, right? So that's what's represented here. Let's look at decentralized now. And again, if you take any of these red points, though it's not one, there are several of them, but even if you take one of these red points, all the dots around it have a problem, right? So similarly with this one, etc. So it's better than the centralized system in terms of its resiliency, but it still has vulnerabilities. But look at this one. What about this distributed network? Pick any point you like and remove that, and you will see that the network still remains, right? So basically, this is an example of how a distributed network is structured. And in blockchain, we are always talking about distributed networks. So this is what gives it its first power. Now, I want you to think for a moment about distributed networks in real life, okay? So I'll give you a hint that they're quite common in nature, but they're not so common in man-made systems. So if you're having problems identifying distributed networks in the real world, you'll see that most of your examples will come from nature. And one easy way to see that is maybe the coronavirus. So the viruses, why they are so resilient is because there's no leader virus. You can't just find the leader and kind of get rid of it and, the entire problem disappears. This is one of the issues, of distributed networks. The internet is close to a distributed network as it gets, okay? However, don't get confused between decentralized and distributed. So for example, Google, which is accessible almost everywhere, though Rama can probably vouch to the fact that, in some very big countries, it's not accessible. And the reason is because it's not truly distributed. It's actually a decentralized network, which means that there is someone who can turn off the network within that area, right? So when we're talking of blockchain, we're always talking about resiliency, which comes from the distributed nature of things. So that's the first superpower. Okay, now I also want to break the myth that blockchain is a new technology. I think you've probably got a hint already by looking at the newspaper article that Bitcoin just appeared, magically exactly on the day when that article about, bailout for banks came. So of course, there's some planning going on. So blockchain is actually composed of many other technologies like cryptography, distributed peer-to-peer networking, tokens, you may have heard of digital currencies, mining, or what is called denial of service, basically all these different technologies, let's call them, have existed for decades and some even for centuries. So cryptography has been around for literally thousands of years. The first peer-to-peer network appeared in the early 2000s. Remember, Bitcoin appears in 2009. So we are talking about almost a decade before. Similarly, digital payments and tokens have been used even before. The denial of service, which is the algorithm used in mining, which we will look at later, appeared in 1997. So the point I'm making is that blockchain is not so fundamentally new a technology as it seems. So what's really new about this? And this is what sometimes people miss, that the new part here was actually that this technology, blockchain or Bitcoin at that time, solved what is called the double spend problem. So let's just take a quick detour and look at what is this double spend problem very quickly. So the double spend problem, firstly, does not occur in the physical world. So if you're exchanging physical goods, whether it's a gold bar or cash, or even bartering, a sheep for some apples, there's no problem with double spend, because if you give that gold bar away, it doesn't exist with you anymore. So I think this is simple to understand. However, let's move to the digital world, the world that we are connected in right now. So the digital world is made up of bits and bytes, which are very easy to copy and transport. And you don't even know if the person on the other side is actually the real person. So how do you really know that this is me, Anjan, and it's not, a very sophisticated robot that's actually giving this talk, right? So this is where Bitcoin or blockchain technology, the technology behind Bitcoin, made the true innovation. It solved the double spend problem. It actually solved the problem of duplication in the digital world. So we won't get into how it solved that. That's a big topic in itself. But the way it solved it is called the consensus mechanism, which is at the heart of how blockchain technology works. Okay, so I want you all to all understand that the real innovation here is being able to solve the double spend problem. Okay, let's move on. And they're just going to be one or two small technical bits, not very detailed ones, but it's very important for you to understand this, to understand the true power of blockchain. So when we come to immutability, I've mentioned about distributed networks, but let's talk about this for a second. So what is a hash? Because every manager, I believe, should know what a hash is. And it's very simple, nothing complicated here. So look at this data. Data is any input. It can be a name, it can be a photo, it can be a video file. We all know what an input is. Now imagine it goes into a function, a machine. This is a mathematical function, and it churns out from that input a set of numbers and letters. Okay, and it's always a fixed length. So basically this output is called the hash, or also the result of the hash function, the hash digest also sometimes it's called. So what is the value of this? Let's look at this a little bit more carefully. So I've got a small simulation here. I hope you'll be able to see it well. So watch the input area, and this is the output, the hash. Okay, so I'm going to assume I'm typing something in the input on top. And as I type, watch what happens to the output, which is at the bottom. So you can see that irrespective of the amount of information that's going in on the top, the output is randomly changing. But can you all see that it's of a fixed length, irrespective of how much I type on top? So basically, we are observing at least three things. One, that is even the slightest input change results in a completely radical change in the output. The output is always of a fixed length, and that from the output, we can't really guess what the input was. By looking at the characters at the bottom, we won't know what the input was, right? So this is like a unique digital fingerprint that is being done of the data using the hashing algorithm. Okay, so let's keep this in mind, because we're going to see very quickly why this is important when we talk of blockchain. So this is the last piece that you need to pay attention to. After that, it becomes much easier, but it's a core concept to understand the fundamentals of blockchain in the context of managerial decision making. So let's look at some data. Okay, the stuff, the text in blue and green, I think is human interpretable. It's very easy to understand what it is. This is my name, the school I went to, the date of birth, city, etc. But if I look at the hash values, so the green, if I put that into a hash function, I can get this as the hash output, the hashes. We just saw how that is done through a mathematical function. But by looking at just these fields, I can't really correlate. By seeing 5584, I can't guess that it's going to be my date of birth, right? I think this is pretty easy to follow. So let's create a little bit more sophistication here. So remember we said that we are trying to digitize trust. So let's see how that is possible in one of the ways. So here, let's have the inputs. Okay, so TX0 is, let's say, transaction, or it's just an input. So my name, and then I have a hash value of that. So I've taken this and I put it here. I could have another input, my school, and I could also get a hash value of that. But now comes the interesting part. I could actually take two hash values and use them as inputs to get another output. Again, always of a fixed length. So this 2E, 4E, 84C5 depends on Anjan and St. Xavier's. And remember, if I make the slightest change here, this thing will completely change, right? This is the definition of the hash function. So I can continue with this and I can get what is called a root hash. Now, look at the beauty of this mechanism. It's a very simple mechanism, but I could have an entire library of books, or I could even have video files or whatever else I want as input. And all that gets converted into a very small root hash. But the beauty here is if I change any of those inputs, I will have a big change in the output. They will not correspond. So without knowing what the contents of the actual information is, I can prove that the information has not changed in transit. And I can prove the origin of the information as well. So these inputs could come from different sources. The date of birth could come directly from a hospital. The school's name could come from the school, etc., etc. You get the point. So this structure is called a Merkle tree because it has a tree-like form. Okay, and the Merkle tree has got absolutely nothing to do with this lady, okay, Angela Merkel. So don't confuse that, but it's a nice way to remember this Merkle tree. Okay, so this was the last technical part. Now we'll just get into actually understanding what do we do with all this. So let's now understand what a blockchain is. So let's look at a block. A block is nothing but a container. It's a data structure, just like you have a PPT file or an XLS file, which has certain rules that the computer understands. Similarly, a block is a container. Now, within that container, you can put in data, right? And that data we can put in the form of a hash. We already learned that. Instead of putting the raw data or the human interpretable data, we can put in data that is hash, which points to the original data. So block 0 is, of course, the first block. So we can take just the container, or we can put some dummy content into it, and we can hash that, right? So now comes block 1. So what is block 1? It's another container, but within this is the hash of the first block, right? So the first block is connected with block 0, or the genesis block, via this hash that is contained within this block 1 container itself, and so on and so forth. So now I can take block 1, maybe put in new content if I want, and hash that, and put the hash value of that into block 2. So what is happening here is that we are chaining each of these data structures one with the other, and there's an interdependency, right? And so on and so forth. You can continue. So basically, each block is linked to its previous block via the hash, and this is what creates immutability. Immutability means it cannot be changed easily. Actually, immutability in this context doesn't mean that it cannot be changed, but if you change it, you will detect that change very easily, right? So if I change anything in the original data, the hash value changes, which means I will not get the chain to be showing exactly as it was supposed to. I'll be able to detect where that change occurred. And also, as we create more and more blocks, obviously something that is at the start gets more and more embedded or gets more and more secured because it's interdependent on many other factors that come after it. So one way to visualize this is like the Russian dolls, right? So the smallest doll can be considered the block 0. And then you have all these other dolls which are encasing it. So to get to these earlier or the smaller dolls, I have to go through all these others, right? So any change that happens in any of them automatically will be detected, right? So this is basically what's going on with a blockchain. So a blockchain is nothing but a chain of blocks which contain data, which are in the form of hashes, okay? Okay, so let's complicate our life. Let's go beyond Bitcoin now. So far we are in 2009 and Bitcoin is equal to blockchain, but that's a myth because now we are in 2021, almost in 2022. So we need to go a little, faster. So Bitcoin is basically one use case of a technology called blockchain. And what is that technology? We just saw that it's a distributed network and it has these properties of immutability. How is it done? By the chaining via the hash mechanism. But let's complicate it further. Blockchains are nothing but a subset of a larger technology, which is called distributed ledger technology or DLTs. Okay, so DLT will have a different structure from a blockchain, but it will always still be distributed and it will still have that immutability function that we saw, which are the two superpowers we have seen so far. Okay. Okay, so let's complicate life even more. Now, by now, we should know that Bitcoin is just one use case. Bitcoin is also the operating system, or correctly put, one of the blockchain protocols to add to the confusion. Okay, but you probably have heard of these other ones as well, like Ethereum, maybe Hyperledger Fabric, Corda, etc., etc. So there are actually hundreds of blockchain protocols now. Blockchain or DLT, I'm loosely interchanging those words. So the purpose here is to understand that each of these different protocols has a particular purpose. So you have to start with what are you trying to do before you choose which blockchain you're going to use. So if you wanted to do money transfer without an intermediary, and it was only about money transfer, then perhaps Bitcoin may suffice. But if you're trying to connect an IoT or an Internet of Things device to a blockchain, perhaps IOTA would be better. Okay, so the point I'm making here is there is not one blockchain, but there are literally hundreds of different protocols or operating systems that you can choose from. To complicate life even more, if that wasn't enough, you can segment them by what we call public blockchain or private permission blockchains, or even hybrid, which is a combination of public and private. And public ones are basically those that any member of the public can easily join the network, like the Bitcoin or Ethereum. But most of the time, you may not have heard of the permissioned ones because they're not available and open to everyone in the world. So in Navozyme, for the maritime industry, for certain actors, we're basically using Hyperledger Fabric. Okay, so the use case will determine which type of blockchain protocol you'll decide. Okay, so that was, I think, enough as a teaser on what is blockchain. But I think now comes the more interesting part. Why should you consider using it? And when should you do that? So let's look at that. So just like to be or not to be, the question that we'll try to answer is to use or not to use blockchain. So just because you've learned about a tool doesn't mean that you need to use it all the time. So let's give you a checklist. So here are 4 simple questions that can be used as a starter to decide whether you should consider using blockchain or not. So the first is, are there many parties? So multiple and especially untrusted parties sharing information. Because at the end, this technology helps with trust. So if you have multiple parties who are untrusted, it's going to be actually beneficial here to reduce the cost of your transactions. Second, is the information critical in nature? Is it a life and death kind of information? So the more critical it is, the more valuable it will be to use this technology. As in the maritime industry, for what we are doing, sometimes the information can literally mean, an accident or not. So for us, it's definitely informed. Then do you want to make sure that this information actually is immutable? Or I would change this slightly. So not that it cannot be changed, but can you trace who's made those changes? Can the auditing be done very easily? And then finally, is it a process that is maybe a simple process, but repeated all the time, right? So these are 4 questions. And not that you need a yes to all those 4, but the more yeses you have means that this technology perhaps can be useful. Then let's look at 4 scenarios in which blockchain's value proposition can be quite good and is quite common as well in usage. So one is what we call provenance, which is basically track and trace. So if you want to track something, trace something, in a very efficient manner, then this technology can be very interesting. Again, think of the blocks in the chained manner. So if I want to know the origin and at what point did that enter the chain, it's going to be very easy to do that. Second, notarization. So if we want to, have the identity of someone like a digital signature, or you want to eliminate, lots of countersigns, etc. This can be, again, this technology, because it's immutable, right? So if somebody says that the origin comes from that source, it can be proven very easily. Third is value transfer. And this is actually the example of Bitcoin, where value in that case is money, but value can be other things also. It doesn't have to be always monetary. It could be goodwill, it could be asset, it could be, some other intangible as well. So what blockchain allows you to do is to make micro fractions of that. So when you're doing value transfer from one geographical area to another part of the world, it's a very efficient process here, which is very difficult in the traditional way. And then finally, streamlining or disintermediation. So if you see that there are many silos of information or brokers who are just, assisting with sharing of information, all these things can be broken down using blockchain. So these 4 areas are still conceptual. So let me show you that blockchain is already here. Okay, and you can all later, I'll be happy to pass these slides. There are links also. So blockchain currently is being used in almost every area that you can think of, whether it's in government, bodies, taxation, waste management, border control, supply chain, diamonds to trace whether the diamond is authentic or not, fishing, is there sustainable fishing going on, etc., etc. Music in terms of property rights for the intellectual property of the artist. All these things is where this technology is actually being used right now. So what I'm going to do is now, and with this I'm going to finish and open it up to questions. The starting point in Navozyme was not the technology, but was the problem. And here you see Filipino seafarers waiting to get endorsements before they can go on a ship. Endorsement means they need basically stamps and signatures from officials saying that they are qualified to go on board a ship. It's a little bit like a visa process that many of us may be used to. But imagine, and this is just before COVID, but the scenario hasn't changed that much. They wear masks now, but it's still a similar thing. So the starting point for us was, can we use technology like blockchain to help them? And if the answer is yes, then perhaps it's inspiring to do some work here. So very quickly, what we do in Navozyme, it's a company that was established with the idea of reducing friction in maritime certification processes across the world. The word Navozyme is a play on two words, navigation and enzyme. An enzyme is this tiny particle, often invisible, but that helps balance larger forces. So we work with a lot of large forces like ship owners, regulatory bodies, etc., but we are not directly in competition with them. So we over the years, we've got some recognition. In Singapore, we are considered one of the promising scale-ups, etc., etc. But we are also proud that today we are working with a lot of maritime stakeholders. Some of these names you may have heard of, like Maersk, which is one of the largest shipping companies in the world. But what we do is, we work with a number of different organizations, and we help them interchange their data in a secure fashion, in protecting the confidentiality, the privacy, and in real time, reducing friction. So for us, a certificate is not a piece of paper. It's actually data fields which are coming from their original sources. And we're just making sure that that data is represented properly for the process in question. So we work on 4 use cases right now. Seafarers' credentials, that is basically making sure that all those paperwork, the training certificates, etc., can be ensured and issued in a seamless manner. We do stuff with ships entering and leaving ports, and also the collection of the waste from the ships. This is called MARPOL, Marine Pollution Regulation, and also ship registration. Just like registering a car, you have some paperwork. Registering a ship is even more complex. So when you build a new ship or you buy and sell a ship, there's a lot of processes to be done. So we reduce friction for all these different stakeholders by focusing on the processes involved in those things for the exchange of information. We have done a lot of pilots, and so this technology actually has tangible benefits depending on what your interests are. So if it is productivity, we showed that in the ports of Barcelona and Tenerife, we can save over 66,000 administrative hours. Or if it is about security, because you're avoiding physical contact points, right? So in the COVID times, this is important. Or just greenhouse gases because of reduced transportation of physical goods, or also less usage of paper, right? So I won't get into too many details here, but there are tangible benefits if we apply this technology properly. So again, I won't get into all of these different tech stacks, but the ones that are interesting here is we've created what we call blockchain-enabled electronic certificates, and I'm going to show you a very brief example of how we use that, and also the distributed digital identity. So your identity now is not because you can show a piece of paper saying that you are so-and-so, but because it's something that's now within your control, and it is your credentials are not at the hands of any one organization, but it's really as part of this distributed network, right? So this is where the world is going towards. So you have more control over your own privacy. You have more control over what you want to share and show other people. So this photo was about, can blockchain help improve lives? And what we have done is, I won't get into all the steps, but basically the outcome of that is, with a few clicks, the training institutions are able to issue credentials to these different seafarers with all their certifications also available on their mobile phones. And these 2 QR codes, again, you can play with that later, but if you point your phones to that, you will see that one of them is actually a genuine QR code and another one is not. So these QR codes are not just quick response codes pointing to a website. They actually contain all the data fields that are pertinent to the certificate. So it works in a very different manner, okay? And I can go on and on, but I think I'll pause here. I have plenty of other slides, etc., but I'd like to actually open it up for questions and discussion. So I'm going to also stop sharing my screen so that I can see you all, but I may bring it back if any reference to that is required. So thank you for listening to me, and I'm open to any comments, questions. Thank you.
Thank you. It was very engaging, and it was, I think, quite challenging for you to try and cover everything you covered in such a short time, and in using language that is as non-technical as it can get. There is one question from Hari, who wanted to know to what extent is blockchain technology being used in transportation? And of course, your own company is looking at sea transportation. But I think his venture is in the business of transporting people, buses, in fact. And he's looking at providing a B2B service to bus operators, right? So could you share with us some examples of blockchain's use in the transportation industry?
Yes, thanks, Rama, for that. So again, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of use cases right now, and many of them in what we call production environment. That means they're being actually used at scale, but we may or may not be aware of them, right? So as Navozyme, we are tracking about 30 organizations globally, just in maritime certification related issues that are using blockchain technology. So that's the first statement, that there's a lot going on here. So what I will say will just be scratching the surface. So when we talk about, for example, land transportation, so bus service, for example, what comes to my mind are a few things. One could be really about the data in terms of making the bus service much more efficient. So, you are able to now capture in real time information about people who are using that service. You can have digital identities for each and every passenger, if you like, and you can, without, again, breaching the confidentiality, the privacy, so those are very important things. So often people will not share that data because I don't want all my life's information to be shared with some third party. But now, and this is why the hashing mechanism also has its power. So I can keep the raw data where it needs to be. I don't need to copy that data and put it in my servers, but I can have the hashes pointing, to where the raw data is, right? So our model in Navozyme is not a model in which we are replicating the likes of Facebook and Google. This is very important. So though we are taking data, we are not taking raw data. We are actually figuring out a way which we believe is the future of how data will be used, right? So anonymized information, respecting privacy. So, if you look at this bus transportation, if you think big, you'll be able to do a lot of analytics. You'll be able to add other features as well, including, though you can do it with other technologies as well. So I'm not advocating that blockchain will work for every use case that you have or should be used, but you may also want to create a loyalty program, for example. And this is where tokenization can be quite interesting, right? You may want to, look at other sophisticated features here. So what I want to, on this question, I also want to kind of warn the manager that, just because you have now a hammer, don't go looking for nails. And blockchain is a very sophisticated technology. So unless you really have something which is very critical, it's like, don't use a rocket to go and buy, your eggs at the supermarket next door. You can go walking or use a bicycle. So not everything requires blockchain. Okay, so that's why I would go with the checklist again. I would go with, really, do you need that or not?
Another question, Anjan, is how do you know if a particular blockchain, let's say, protocol, let's say in the case of a cryptocurrency, if it's a scam or not? Are scams possible with blockchain?
So that's a tough one. So what I will tell you is that, I'll tell you a little story, if I may. So many years ago, I went to Malta, okay, at the blockchain Malta conference, which was considered one of the most important conferences. There were about 8,000 founders of blockchain companies, okay? And this is, if I'm not wrong, we are talking of the year 2018 or late 2018 or early 2019. So this is the time when ICOs, the initial coin offerings were right at its peak. So all the people there, and I'm not exaggerating, other than one or two founders. So when I would ask those founders, okay, what exactly are you doing? And which protocol do you use, and why have you used this protocol, etc. They would all just bypass that question, and they would, basically throw out a lot of different jargon in front of me. And I was thoroughly confused. But all of them had managed to raise a few million in funding. Okay. So now comes 2020, early 2020. So this is just before COVID struck. Again, we go and visit Malta, and the Maltese government actually has, so because of our ship registry application, they want to meet with us. And we instantly, in our first slide, we say we don't do anything with cryptocurrencies. We are not, having any tokens, etc. And you know what their response was? Their response was, we know that already, which is why we are willing to meet with you. So the same organization, which was kind of supporting all kinds of blockchain initiatives, became more mature in kind of filtering out. So the answer here is, it's just basic due diligence. I think don't go by just what the website says. Yeah. Look at, I would ask a question like, is there some things already in production? If you have an IT engineer, it's very easy to figure that out also, right? You can actually go behind the scenes and see, do they have a lot of server activity? Are they using cloud services or not? You can go and basically today, try and talk to some of the senior leaders within that organization. So most of the time, even today, the cryptocurrencies, and anyone can launch a currency. So this is the beauty, right? I can launch a currency in the next month if I want. And maybe many people will buy that as well, and so I could raise some money. But actually at the end, it will, unless there's a clear purpose as to why you're doing that, it's not going to work out well. So ask the fundamental question. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And I think, Rama, this is basic entrepreneurship, right? You start with the needs first, not with the technology or the tools. So just stick to the basics. I think that is the key thing.
So next question, Anjan, is, are the hash values of each block in a chain dynamic or static? And if someone changes the transaction value, will the hash value change or not?
Yes, so the hash will change based on the input. Okay, so if you have a new input with the slightest of change, the hash value is going to change, right? So again, this is also perhaps it's a slightly different question, but important to bring up at this point, that the immutability factor in blockchain has a meaning which says that you can't actually change once it's on the block and it's been put on the chain. Okay, so whatever information is there remains there forever. However, if you want to modify that information, you can. So what will happen is a new block will be created with new information, new hash values, but the trail of that will never be erased. So here also, this is why, and these mistakes have been made in the past, and I think today people are very much aware of it, but you never put raw data on the chain. So you never put human interpretable information onto the blockchain, because especially today with GDPR and all those kinds of regulations, if you want to delete that information on the chain, you can't delete. That's the fundamental definition of a blockchain, right? So it's a double-edged sword. So if you design it well, it's going to work to your benefit. But if not, you may be ending up with a lot of trouble.
And the next question, Can you give an example of something that blockchain adoption can achieve that a more traditional digital transformation of a business process cannot?
Yeah, so in public blockchains, okay, public blockchains are by definition those that any member of the public can access. So what makes blockchain? Actually, purists do not look at private permission blockchains. They even don't like to call them blockchains. Okay, so I differ a little bit on that. But here we are not arguing the morals and the ethics. We're talking about what's the value here. So if you look at voting, for example, a public good, where everyone wants, private voting, everyone wants instantaneous, efficient results. Everyone wants to make sure that there is no fraud happening in the middle, etc. So, and these things have been created, but in very small ways. So why not have a voting system where votes can be done from your home, and results can be instantaneous, but you can be guaranteed that there is no mischief going on within the process itself, right? So something like that I think is an excellent use case of blockchain technology. Just very difficult to manage because of the mindsets of the people. It's got nothing. The problem is not technological. The problem is either political or lack of understanding of how these things work, etc. But that would be a fantastic application of blockchain. I see blockchain as a subset, as one of the tools within your toolkit of digital transformation. In fact, the courses that I lead finally end up with the last afternoon focusing on what is digital transformation itself, right? Because blockchain is just one small piece within that entire gamut of stuff. On this also, I just want to add the word digitalization also has been misinterpreted, especially in what we do. So when we first went and we said we are doing electronic certificates, many people would say, but we already have that. And in a way, they were correct, because they would take a photo of their paper and they would send it as an electronic certificate to somebody else, right? So we actually now like to explain that a little better. We are not worried about the paper or the representation of that document. We are interested in the data fields, and particularly two points there, that it's coming from the original source and that it's not been tampered with. And at that moment, you can check all that, right? Which is now why we invented this new term, blockchain-enabled electronic certificates, or BEES, which is kind of catching on now. So we are bringing BEES back into existence.
So the example that you gave of taking a picture of a certificate and sending it across would be a digital process, because you're digitizing a paper document and you're transferring it over the internet to another user. But a blockchain technology actually does much more than that, right? It in some ways authenticates that document, because you could actually photograph a fraudulent document and send it across, and the recipient would not have any way of knowing whether that original document was the authentic one or it has been tampered with.
Exactly. So I could have a paper, and that's why it's also different, though it looks like a normal QR code, but the way it functions at the back is quite different. It's not one website or one person from a database saying that it's okay. It's actually the network checking each and every of those data fields from maybe different sources, and then returning saying that it's okay, right? So this is why it takes a little bit of time to explain, what it is. Because if not, if I just go straight and show you the QR code, you'll be like, okay, and so what's so great about that? That's why it takes a little bit of effort to understand the hashing mechanism, to understand this Merkle tree, etc. And that's why I think every manager should know those basics. You don't need to be an expert on that, but you need to be, at least having an understanding of what that means.
You did not revisit the ledger, the distributed ledger in more detail, but I'm assuming that when a hash is generated, let's say for the certification of a seafarer, that hash now appears in multiple ledgers in different places, right? it is not restricted to a single ledger.
Yeah, so that is the distributed network part. So the network is distributed. What is distributed? The ledgers are distributed, right? So these are, and not everything needs to be shared with everyone. So in a public blockchain, that's the concept, that everything is available to everyone. But in a enterprise setting, that would perhaps not work because, you know, the companies don't share everything to everyone, right? So this is where the permission blockchain protocols appeared, and why we use Hyperledger Fabric, which is one of the protocols that has become very popular, set up originally by the Linux Foundation, is because they have a lot of mechanisms by which you're able to design the system to allow certain bits of information to be shared with only certain parties. But the concept of the distributed network still remains intact, right? So this is why I'm saying, irrespective of whether it's public or private, etc., the superpower number one is that it is a distributed network, which means it is resilient. Remember the coronavirus, right? Why it's so sticky. So that is very important. It doesn't depend on one individual or one person. It's the network that is giving it its power. And the second one is the mechanism by which this immutability is there.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. Can the hash digest be considered the address of the original data?
So yes and no. Again, it depends on what your use case is. So often this is where the engineering bit comes in, that you design the Merkle trees in ways. So again, on this point, there is a little bit of misunderstanding, or there could be, that that in public blockchains, the transaction speed are very slow. So this is why it's very difficult to buy a coffee using Bitcoin today, because it can take hours before agreement is reached amongst all the different nodes in the network, the different points or holding the data. But in a private network, in a permission network, you don't actually have that problem. So you're not doing any mining or any lot of work that your computer has to do. So we didn't get into that. I purposely avoided that because it will take a lot of time, quite frankly, to understand the details of how that process works. It's at the heart also, the consensus mechanism. So here, it suffice to say that basically there is a big distinction between a public blockchain and a private one. And one of the important things in a private network is that it doesn't have many of those problems that a public network has, like transaction speed, like the mining bit. In fact, they don't use mining at all, but they have a consensus mechanism, which means they have a way in which to avoid the double spend, but they don't do it with the technology that Bitcoin used in 2009, right? So these, the carbon footprint, etc., are serious problems of Bitcoin, but many of those things are not true in the permissioned blockchain space, and this is often not understood very well.
So one question from a participant is that a friend is running a financial services platform, and how would you think about the pros and cons of moving to a blockchain-based platform?
Yeah, so if you look at implementation considerations, so I would again begin with the checklist, right? So is the information critical? Are there multiple parties involved? Is there a relatively simple process that's repeated often? How critical is the immutability factor, et cetera, et cetera? That's the starting point, right? Then you look at those 4 areas. What exactly is the need that cannot be solved already using simpler methods? So for example, is it provenance? Are we talking about, tracking and auditing in the financial services? Is that one of the major issues? Is the cost of that important? Or is it a KYC, that knowing your customer? So then the digital identity piece can come in, perhaps, right? Or are you trying to reduce the cost of inter-border, remittances, right? So then you can think of the tokenization, etc. However, it's not a simple answer. It will take quite a lot of revisiting your business. What blockchain can do is it can give you a tremendous advantage within your business model, which the traditional models, may not give you, right? So that's how I would approach it. I would approach it very strategically. Information issue. I would look at, you must always not look at one technology, but you must again look at what are you trying to solve, traditional approach, which other technologies sometimes are needed, and look at the pros and cons of that, right? And often, you can make a fundamental shift. So what we are doing in Navozyme, for example, changes the nature of the business for many of these organizations. Ship agents, for example, who thought that a lot of value is generated by them being the intermediary, suddenly realize that's not where they can actually generate value in the future, right? But the good news here is we do have ship agents who are still collaborating with us because they want to displace the others from that kind of thing. So it's a business model shift that can occur with a technology like blockchain.
Are there any loopholes that can be exploited by hackers or other let's say digital criminals, cyber criminals?
Yes, a good point. So though the blockchain technology itself is very resilient, and Bitcoin proves it also, for being around for so long. However, what about the information before it goes into the chain? So the access to the chain. So what we have shown is that the chain and the network, and once the data is there, is very resilient and immutable. But we have to pay a lot of attention to who has access to those data entry points, right? And this is not a blockchain issue, but this brings us to one other key concept, that there is not usually one technology that should be used to resolve everything. So there's a whole topic here, which is called adjacent technologies to blockchain. So whether it's biometrics or it's technologies like PUF, physical unclonable functions, which uses AI, etc. So we have to secure that the physical object, before it connects to the digital world, also has that level of security, right? Otherwise, you're going to have garbage in and garbage out, but the garbage inside is very secure, right? Which will not be the best way. So it's a very good question, but it's not really a blockchain problem. It's I would say more like a digital transfer. Plastic has actually been recycled. So the traceability of that today under the international circumstances is very, very difficult, especially if you keep it using traditional means, which is a paper certificate, somebody signing and giving you evidence of that. Yeah. So I hope it becomes very clear as to why there is value in the garbage to be tracked, right? Because if not, one, you can actually be fined. And especially marine pollution regulations are very strict. The captain of a vessel can be even imprisoned, even if a certain amount of oil is unexplained, right? So this is in the interest of everyone, but it's really to protect the oceans. Regulations have been made, but often regulations lack or lag the technology. So I hope this becomes quite clear to understand, why somebody is willing to use this.
Priyanka, let me continue. Yeah, please mute yourself. So the next question is: can blockchain be used to verify certain claims, such as land registration, so as to reduce frauds?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a classic use case of blockchain. So again, this comes under provenance and also under the digital identity. So what is beautiful about a piece of land is you have the geographical locations, you have the latitude, longitude of the boundary, and now you can put that boundary on the blockchain and tag it to the identity of a particular individual. And those records now are immutable. So you don't have to waste a lot of legal fees to prove that that land belonged to you, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a classic use case. It's already being done in certain countries. And I understand also in India, this is kind of on the agenda of the government as well in certain places.
What about use in manufacturing for productivity improvements? Have you seen any use cases there?
So if you're looking at productivity improvements, then you're actually thinking of information silos. So, when you're manufacturing something, then there's several pieces, components, which come in from, various places in the world. So tracking that arrival times, whether it's a genuine piece or not, or just information that is lying with somebody, but now you have to confirm that via an exchange of email or phone call. Now, with a common platform, you can see that in real time and you can trust that information. So tremendous efficiency is actually possible. Schneider Electric, for example, has been already using blockchain for several years now, precisely with this objective. So there are many use cases for this.
Okay. Are you seeing, wherever blockchain technology has been applied by organizations, how long does it take them usually to generate a financial benefit from the application of the technology? Are there any studies in this area, or is this just still a very incipient area in which we don't have much reliable research?
Yeah, so it's a good question. What I can say is that now what I'm seeing, so what we have been tracking really over the last 4 years quite actively is how many solutions are coming out in production. Okay, that means they're actually being used, because when you put a software in production, it's a big commitment. So another thing is you have a pilot or a prototype, etc. So we're not talking about that. But when somebody decides to put it in production, that means they have already quantified the benefits of that, right? That's the most rational way to look at that. So what we can see in our particular use case itself is that we start with a process that actually takes quite a long time initially, because what we are doing is we are mapping the current process, then we are mapping the change because of the technology inputs that are coming. So what is the new process thanks to blockchain technology in this particular case? And then the difference in that, the delta between the existing process and the change. And that's the quantification, right? Now that you can then under different buckets like we do it under decarbonization or productivity, etc. And then you have to value that. Like, so what is the value that somebody puts on the time that is saved, right? And this can be a relative number. Like somebody in Europe will say this is super important. Somebody in Philippines will say we don't really care about that, right? So it varies. So, but that exercise has to be done, right? So what I'm saying, the only piece of data I can give you is the same link actually has that on the slide that I put. You can see how many large, FTSE 500 companies are putting blockchain solutions in production as we talk. And what I've noticed on the graph is that graph is now becoming exponential, which means, what is coming out now is actually a proven use case for this technology. But it doesn't go into details of how it's being used, etc. So sometimes it can be just a very small combination of this technology with something that already exists, right? But I think there was a period, especially in 2019, 2020, when this Gartner curve showed very clearly that the hype part had been deflated already. So now I see that actually coming back again, but with very concrete value-driven use cases. But I don't have any very concrete data on, what is the return on investment, etc. I think those things are still to be seen.
One of the participants was very intrigued about the use of blockchain and diamonds in the diamonds business. Could you share your thoughts on how that was? I mean, how blockchain is useful there?
Yeah. So basically, each piece of stone has its unique value and its uniqueness, right? That's what makes a diamond a diamond. So now, how do we capture that value and prove that value for eternity as it perhaps exchange hands, across generations? So this is again where the immutability of blockchain. So if you put a record of that on the chain, which can be accessed by anyone, The one is that nobody will dispute that that's a fraudulent entry. And secondly, it remains forever, right? So that's the simple kind of way to explain that. There are other things which are also being experimented with, so actually the physical diamond, the light properties of that, they are then captured, that information is captured and tagged on the chain, right? So now you can uniquely say that it is exactly this piece which this owner refers to, right? It's a little bit like what's happening today with NFTs also and artwork, right? It's the same thing. So it's a unique piece of art, but now what makes NFTs very efficient is I can have digital art directly corresponding to the artist and even retribute that artist and compensate that artist in a very efficient manner, which through traditional means is just very difficult to do.
Have you seen, Anjan, have you seen the application of blockchain in a large way in medicine or in the healthcare sector?
Oh, yeah. Yes, that's already a big use case. So vaccines, for example, for COVID. So I was in a panel just a few months back where quite a lot of the big pharma companies were explaining how they were using blockchain for tracking and tracing the vaccine usage, right? And also the availability, the distribution of that. So it's a very classic example, but it is already being done at scale as we talk. So you know what, another thing I'll tell you that, so blockchain for some of you may look like it's still of the future, it is yet to come, but actually that's not the case. The technology has already matured to a point where it has become more and more invisible. So for example, in Singapore, the identity card of the individuals, maybe I have one here. Yes, I do. Okay, so I don't know if you'll be able to see that. You can, right? There's a QR code here. What you may not see is it doesn't have an expiry date, this identity card, okay? The previous identity card had an expiry date. So now what they have done is they have put these credentials on the blockchain, and basically, you don't really need to go to anyone to get confirmation, etc. Right? So what I like to explain is this blockchain is already in your pocket. It's just that you're not aware of it. Similarly, the vaccines, it's already there, but nobody's flashing that saying, hey, we are using blockchain, because that's not really required, right? But it's already happening.
One participant would like to know if it's feasible in a short time. They would like to know what minting is.
Minting. So minting, I think he's referring to mining.
Mining, yes.
Yeah. So mining, yeah, sure. So mining is the mechanism by which the double spend problem is solved by Bitcoin. Okay. So remember, double spend means not allowing two things to happen, two assets with the same thing to take place in the digital world. So this mechanism is called the consensus mechanism. Now, the way this is achieved in Bitcoin is via a process called mining. And what is mining? So I'll try to be very brief about this. And so mining is the same. I'm trying to find a very similar thing. So, when you send an email out from your server, there is something else that's happening. There is a little bit of work that your computer is doing before it is allowed to send the email. And what is that? That is an anti-spamming mechanism. There's a gentleman called Adam Cash, who in the 90s created what is called a denial of service algorithm, which is already incorporated within your email systems. So how do you understand this? So if I was a spammer and I want to crash a server, let's say the Mahindra University server, one way for me to do that would be to send billions of emails to your server almost at the same time, right? Now that would crash your server. But now if I had, so what this email thing does, what this denial of service algorithm does, before I can send an email, if I have to do a little tiny bit of work per email, so my computer has to solve, let's say, a puzzle, and then I can send the email. Now, if I'm sending one email or 10 emails or 100 emails, probably it's insignificant. Nothing will go wrong. But if I try to send a billion emails, my computer will crash first before I can crash anyone else's server, right? So this technology, the denial of service technology, has been used in mining. So what they have done is they make different computers in the world solve a puzzle. Whoever can solve the puzzle fastest basically announces that puzzle to the rest of the world. Other people don't have to solve the puzzle, but they can check the results of that puzzle. So they don't have to do all the work. So the proof of work, which is used in mining, right? They don't have to do the entire work, but they can confirm that this computer has done all the work. And if enough computers agree, then consensus is achieved. Then you're allowed to put that transaction on the chain. So this is the heart of how consensus is achieved. It's a very inefficient method in the Bitcoin protocol, but it is a way of achieving the double spend problem being resolved. Now, in 2021, there are many other ways in which the same thing can be resolved in far more efficient manners. So good question, because now you will understand why the carbon footprint problem is there. Because if you have so many computers in the world who are just solving useless problems just to be able to win Bitcoin and mine, it doesn't solve a real need, right? So suffice to know that in other, especially permission mechanisms, etc., there is no mining, okay? But there is consensus achieved in a different way. So I hope it's been sufficiently clear. So it's a challenging question to answer, without some of the demos and the tools, but I hope you get a sense of that.
Okay, so let me see if I think we have addressed all the questions here. Let me see. Does a blockchain have inherently any loopholes that can be exploited, other than the one that you said, where you have, let's say, a vulnerability at the point where the data goes from the physical world to the digital world? Other than this loophole, are there any other loopholes with once the data enters the, let's say, the digital chain?
Well, the other loophole in certain consensus, like the Bitcoin consensus, which is difficult, but it can be achieved, is that if you have the majority of the hash power or the majority of the computers, that means 51% of the computers agree on something, even if it is a false thing, you can incorporate that into the chain, right? So you can actually collude to create something on the blockchain which may not be true. So that is definitely possible. Difficult to do as the chain gets bigger and bigger and more transactions happen. So especially when you're starting off, you want to be very careful, because you won't have that massive level, right? So you need other mechanisms to protect yourself from that.
So I just wanted to come back to what you said earlier, Anjan. I think one of the reasons why people, I think the general public, is unaware of the advances that blockchain technology has made in business processes is that our attention is perhaps too much centered on cryptocurrencies and the regulatory issues surrounding that. And I think it's clear that cryptocurrencies will not take off in a big way unless central banks around the world allow cryptocurrencies to function, right? But what we don't realize, I think what the general public doesn't realize, is that this technology is actually being applied in a number of other processes and has actually gained a lot of traction, which is what you were saying earlier. Yeah,
that's true. However, I would also point to some of the data here. If I'm not wrong, the cryptocurrency industry is already I think $2 or $3 trillion industry. So it is not to be underestimated, and it has grown a lot. Having said that, yes, depending on which jurisdiction you look at, it has the support or it doesn't have the support from the central government. However, there is a lot happening on central bank digital currencies as well. So the central banks themselves have starting to launch now their own crypto. So it's a force to reckon with. However, under the kind of, the tsunami of the cryptocurrencies, many people, especially the managers, I think, should be aware of the potential of the technology behind Bitcoin. So blockchain itself, and this is what I have tried to do. I've tried to unravel, what is the strength and the power behind this technology. So I repeat, when you digitize trust, obviously it's going to give you a lot of benefits, right? So trust is not just for business transactions, it's for any kind of human interaction that we do. And this technology didn't exist before. So it's very powerful, but requires careful thought and application, but can give you a massive business advantage.
Let's take the final question. Is it possible to counterfeit Bitcoin, in your opinion?
I think not. And I have asked this question also to some, people who are actually part of the Bitcoin core team. So I was fortunate to meet, so Bitcoin is governed by some people who keep refining the protocol, etc. Right? So this is in fact one of the strengths, that it has been proven that it can't be counterfeited, right, over so many years now, right? So I would say that is really the main strength of Bitcoin, but it has many other issues, especially like the energy footprint and all those things. Yeah.
Thank you, Anjan, for that very engaging session. I think you faced a challenge to make this accessible to an uninitiated audience, and I think you've largely succeeded. I think people still have some questions, but I think this can be, one step in the learning journey of those who participated in today's session. So please join me in giving Anjan a round of applause. Let's do where are these? Let's do a digital, clap.
Okay, thank you so much.
To express our gratitude for this very engaging session, and I look forward to welcoming you at Mahindra University. I think both are, from our School of Engineering and School of Management and our School of Law, which would also be interested in the legal aspects of the blockchain technology and what are some areas where it can actually violate the law. I think all our students and even faculty members would be interested in listening to you. So please enjoy the rest of the afternoon in Barcelona, and we'll be in touch, Anjan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rama, and also all the people who have connected patiently to hear these, sometimes tedious steps in the blockchain process. So we are also, I think, given that Mahindra is a pioneering university, at some point, we are already working with training institutions in the maritime industry, right? So if you want your registrar's office to issue flawless credentials onto the mobiles of the things, this could be something, to be considered.
And so, we'll certainly put you in touch with our Center for Executive Education. Perhaps there is potential for us to collaborate on offering some courses here in India. Okay, sure, and let me thank all the participants for your interest in this session. Please, please be on the lookout. If you haven't registered on our social media platforms, LinkedIn particularly, for those of you who are very interested in business, please register on the Mahindra University School of Management LinkedIn page. We have an excellent session coming up tomorrow on the 5 pillars of digital transformation, which is going to be anchored by my colleague Pradeep Racharla. And we have 2 very, very well-known speakers, very experienced speakers on digital transformation. So we look forward to seeing many of you here tomorrow. Thanks, Anjan, and I'll be in touch with you soon. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rama. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.